The next speaker is a Nordic rug veteran, I would say. He's presented several times before and has always been much appreciated. I do believe the topic has been slightly the same throughout the time, focusing on first like very hands-on configuring reporting analytics, and of course growing responsibility. The span is getting broader and broader. So the topic is still people analytics, and the 4 cores will be presented by Henrik Håkansson from Delivery Hero. So you're welcome, Henrik.
Thank you very much, Peter. Right, so thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Henrik Håkansson. As some of you may know me, recognize some of the names in the list. And I'm the director of people analytics at Delivery Hero. So I'm no longer in the Nordics. I'm actually based in Berlin in Germany, but Peter asked nicely. So I thought it was a great idea to come and share some of my thoughts on people analytics. So my responsibility is global people analytics for Delivery Hero. For those of you who don't know what Delivery Hero does, we're actually a house of brands that you may see more as the customer facing ones. And for the Nordics, Foodora is probably the one that you recognize the most, especially if you've ever been hungry and don't want to go to a restaurant and don't feel like cooking your own dinner. So yeah, we're global, a lot of presence in Europe, Asia, and Latin America, primarily in the Middle East. Now over to the core of this presentation, which is the 4 cores. This is my 4 cores. It might be different for other people, but from my experience working with analytics over the last 6 years or so, gathered a lot of experience in this domain, building up this function in actually in 2 companies now, where I'm going to take you through sort of the journey and sort of framework, I would say, around what I expect from people analytics, how you can promote it, how you can build your functions, and what challenges and opportunities there are going forward. So to start off with, fundamentals is one of these cores. Fundamentals is absolutely key because without fundamentals, you're going to have a big challenge to be able to deliver anything within people analytics. Eva touched upon it already. Things like data quality is going to be absolutely crucial. I'll touch upon that a little bit more, but also understanding the architecture. How do you want to do your analytics? Which platforms or infrastructure do you need to build? Ethics is also now coming up more and more, especially as, again, Eva mentioned already, things that might be a little bit sensitive to share with the organization, and especially around bias now on the data. Now, vision for me is absolutely crucial because without a vision, you don't know where to go. So we need to set the sort of the baseline for what we want to do with people analytics first and foremost. Moving on, impact. I think that people analytics is great, obviously, but we need to have some form of impact on the business. HR as a function is a support function. We generally don't generate the income for an organization. We are there to support the business that do generate the income and help us make money and grow as a company, make people feel great and enjoy their jobs. So having business-driven people analytics is very important. On top of that, we have expectations, being realistic with what we can do, both on a timeline, but also on sort of capacity level. What is reasonable to do within people analytics? We often shoot for the moon, but let's also make sure that our stakeholders know where we're going for. Data privacy, data security, especially with GDPR in Europe, very important stuff. Some countries you can get around this a little bit easier outside of Europe, but I think overall it's always something to keep in mind. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about being data-driven versus data-informed as well. The third core is around execution. How do we actually deliver on this? What kind of investments do we need to do? What kind of involvement do we have to have with the organization? And how do we iterate on our products and solutions that we work on in people analytics? Then I'll also touch briefly upon the consulting versus self-service approach. And finally, of course, usually the most exciting stuff that you see at all the conferences, talking about blockchain and machine learning and AI and all these really cool stuff. Of course, we need the basics first, but understanding a little bit about the future, what are we talking about regarding possibilities, challenges, and generally the future of people analytics. So as I said, to start with, for me, a vision is absolutely crucial. So looking at this chart, we have the value and we have the growth of the people analytics, both the company and the function in itself. Where we usually start is at the bottom left corner. Of course, we don't have value, we don't have growth, but eventually we want to grow and work through this over time, basically. And where do we start? We start with raw data. This can be from Workday. This could be from any other system that we start with raw data. We don't have a lot of understanding of why this data appears, but we just have it there. What needs to happen, first of all, is we want to make sure that we have clean data. Because if we don't have clean data, we're going to struggle. And with garbage data, we're going to have garbage analytics. Now, the next stage in this, once we have cleaned the data, we're going to get into standard and custom reports. This is also important to understand this journey, that we don't jump immediately into predictive analytics. You need to have this sort of baseline of an understanding of what kind of information do we have in our systems? What is this telling us about the organization? And this is usually where a lot of people start. Some companies are still here, depending on the maturity. And I would say along this graph that I'm going to show you, you'll be at in any of these boxes at any given time. But moving on from custom and standard reports, we'll move more into visualizations, dashboards, being able to drive self-service for the organization to understand their own metrics and see what's happening in the organization. Now, all of this is basically going to tell us what has happened. So this is descriptive analytics. This is the past, where we can look at historical data and understand, okay, what's been going on in the organization. Moving on, we may look more into KPIs and OKRs, objective key results, key performance indicators, and normalized metrics across the board. And especially if you're a global company or serve multiple countries, multiple regions, it's going to be really crucial to normalize your metrics. Otherwise, you're going to ask for headcount in multiple countries, and you're going to have multiple different solutions or logics behind figuring out what that is. And what does this tell us? Along with the visualizations, we can start looking into why something happened, because we have metrics, maybe we take some actions and we see now the results of those actions. Next step will be, and I need to really put pressure on this, because the jump from KPIs and visualizations and dashboards into machine learning and predictive analytics is quite a big leap, because it requires a lot of technology, both on the back end, but also skills and understanding of your data to really get to that predictive stage of the data. But this will be able to eventually tell us what's going to happen based on the historical data, based on models, based on different algorithms that you implement. And then finally, we want to be able to drive results through analytics. And this is how we make how can we understand how we make the best thing happen? So really around modeling, we see the predictive analytics, what happens if we take certain actions, and how does that impact our organization, and how do we find the optimal route forward? So again, as I said, at any given stage, if you decide to integrate a new system, despite having machine learning, you'll all the way end up back at raw data, because you need to do this step by step with all the data that you're dealing with. Now, how does this translate into different topics for the organization? I have 6 topics. First of all, for me, of course, I'm working in a global organization. This could be regional. But what I'm saying here is that it's really important that the organization has access to this. Even if you have smaller entities and other organizations, it is important that you share this with the organizations to get buy-in and also have a consistency across the organization. We have implemented a concept we call data marts, which is that each entity that we have in the organization has access to their own sort of data warehouse or piece of their data warehouse on their organization, so that they can deliver this or do their own analytics if necessary, while we still do it globally from our central organization. But the key principle here is that we have the same architecture, we have the same capabilities, we have the same KPIs, we have the same logic behind our data. We also want it to be accessible, because without accessible data, it's going to be really difficult to both get the adoption of analytics and also get people to trust this data that we have, and understand also it feeds all the way back to the maintenance of the data. Because if people don't understand why they input all this data or go through all these processes in Workday or other systems, it's going to be really difficult to get them to pay attention to the data quality. And this means also making sure that we have ad hoc availability and visualizing these KPIs and metrics for our organizations, maybe in a standardized way. Quality, maybe not the most fun or sexy topic, but data quality is super important, because again, without good data, we're going to have bad analytics. And therefore, we need to make sure that we start at the very beginning to look into having robust processes for data management and have controls for following up on data quality. And this also leads to good relationships with data owners, because as people analytics, we don't tend to own any data. We just use everyone else's data to generate analytics. Also business driven, because without it being business driven, what kind of value are we actually providing to the organization? It needs to be focused on certain possible actions that the business can take or the questions that they have. And we need to be able to show that we can provide value to the organization that actually makes a difference. And we do this by utilizing data from multiple sources. We have ongoing discussions with our stakeholders and have this continuous part of being part of the business. Again, coming into the continuous way, making sure that you always have fresh data. You have maybe trending data. Once a month, you pull out a report or you can see what's happening over time. Super interesting and super important for the organization to be able to assess what's going to happen. Or, looking back at last year, what happened this time of year, we can prepare for it. And also comparable. So what I mentioned before, if you have a large organization, maybe multiple teams looking at the data, you want to make sure that you standardize the data so that you can easily compare data between regions. And as we said, this could be as easily as asking someone about the headcount. If you're using different logics in different countries or different entities or even different parts of the business, it's going to be really hard to provide solid and trustworthy analytics. So that's all on the vision. So keeping in the mind of the fundamentals, talking about architecture. When you build out a people analytics function, you need to think about your needs. There are tons of tools and solutions out there. As I said, in these two companies that I've built up this function, we've used completely different architecture because we have different needs. So it is worth taking time to think this through and understanding where do you want to go? How does this scale specifically? Because especially if you're in a growing company or if you're in a company that's very big, that you expect to maybe start small and grow at a later stage, you want to build something that you can just iterate on in the future rather than having to rebuild everything 6 months later because whatever you thought of wasn't scalable. And also being consistent in the way that you do your architecture. Again, there's a lot of trial and error on this area, so something to keep in mind. Data quality, again, maybe boring to be repetitive, but in essence, data quality is going to be so key for anyone who's working with data, with people analytics or reporting in general, and even the utilization of the system. So my recommendation is trying to automate this, building reports or validations in systems to be able to prevent bad data from happening, or from even if you manage to load data, bad data through an EIB, you can still have a report that tells you that this is something that's not working. Personally, this is how I classify the proactive versus reactive data quality. Proactive is basically preventing bad data from entering the system, and reactive is taking action on data that's bad but already in the system. And the way I categorize it, there's a multitude of different methodologies for this, but I came up with my own that I really like, which is around completion and correctness. So two different components of data quality. Completion is making sure that you have the data at all, or in some cases, in some regions or countries, you're not allowed to maintain certain data to make sure that you don't have that data, so you don't risk anything with GDPR or any other data privacy issues. And the other part is correctness. So making sure that whatever data you have in there is actually accurate. That could be things like date of birth, making sure that not everyone is born on the 1st of January 1950, which is the default value for Workday, for example. Because realistically, we don't have people who are 71 years old in our companies. But then again, maybe you have an exception. Lastly, the ethics. So making sure that whatever we do, as I said, connected to business value, but also make sure that it's relevant and useful and doesn't sort of prevent you from doing something that's useful for the organization, because ethics can be, and it will be, something that's coming more and more now. I mean, it would be super interesting to do a psychological analysis of everyone in the organization and being able to pinpoint who's going to succeed or who's going to do this and that. But is it really relevant? Is it really ethical to do that? So something to keep in mind going forward within this domain. Now, moving on to the second core, talking about the impact. Business driven, super important. Make sure that you always have a good discussion with your stakeholders. Be part of their roadmaps, be part of their meetings, because what I've learned in HR is that a lot of HR people will never come and ask, I want this report and it's going to look like this. Instead, they will come and, or maybe they won't even come to you, but they will start talking about in their meetings saying that they have this challenge, I have this challenge, and then you need people who can understand and try to translate that business challenge into a technical solution. It's a difficult skill, but it's going to bring a lot of value for your people and also bring a lot of trust for the people that you work with. It's also going to make sure that you have useful decisions. I mean, we can do a great dashboard on the average shoe size of people in one of our locations, but it's not really going to be relevant unless you plan on giving everyone shoes. So making sure that you have that value. Expectations. Again, coming back to this, making sure that we have something that's realistic with the stakeholder, because everyone wants everything yesterday, right? So if you talk to someone, yes, I'd love this report, needs to be done already. What I found is that it usually takes at least a couple of weeks, assuming you have the foundations to build more advanced products. Maybe you can do some things in a couple of days or a couple of hours if it's a really quick fix. But for me, one of the key things here is to underpromise and overdeliver. So my analogy usually is that what's the difference between a delivery date of, let's say, October 15th versus October 15th? Well, in one case, you said it would be ready by October 1st, and now you have an angry stakeholder that's 2 weeks delayed. In the other case, you said, well, it's going to be done by October 25th, and now you're 10 days early. And now you have a happy stakeholder because you set the expectations. So that's something that's going to be really important for the success of a people analytics function. And also making sure that you transform the business to technology. Not everything is going to be possible, but a lot of these things is going to be really important to be able to showcase what we can do and having people on your organization who really understands this. Lastly, again, data privacy and security. GDPR it's everywhere. So we need to keep that in mind. We have the laws and regulations in place. Access control is also a big thing. So a lot of people move, obviously now this year, now that COVID is letting up a little bit, we need to make sure that whoever moves within the company, whoever resigns, we make sure that we remove the access for people who should no longer see it. I'm sure you've seen in the news some of the issues that WhatsApp, for example, had recently on fines on GDPR and some other companies. So it is really important because it can get very expensive for the company if we do this poorly. Now, talking about data-driven and data-informed, I know Eva touched upon it, and I think this is a key thing to think about as well, that even if we have all the data will not always tell us the entire story. So data-driven is and essentially saying that you're using data to make your decisions. You're trusting that the data will give you all the information that you need. So you don't need any additional context. And in this case, let's say, for example, that we have you want to increase salaries and you want to see, okay, what if I increase everyone's salary by 2%? Okay, now you have an absolute cost of that, how much that would be. Then that way you can be data driven because increasing everyone's salary by 2% will cost you X amount. However, something that we focus a lot on in our organization is being data informed instead. And again, it's more terminology, but keeping in mind that using this data to support decisions, but keeping in mind that there can always be additional things that impact your data. Being able to make sure that people critically think about the data that they look at and putting it into context. So again, if we say, for example, we look at attrition or turnover for the past year, and we saw that last September we had 5% people left the company. Okay, so can we expect that 5% of the people will leave this September? Probably not, because that could be a coincidence, or it could be something related to what happened in the business at that very moment, or all of these people had a really bad manager that you've since gotten rid of. So in that case, you need to put it into context and start thinking, okay, just because it happened last year doesn't mean it's happening this year, but maybe we should be mindful and keep that in mind. So there is a difference between correlation and causation when it comes to data that we look at, because there might be more than meets the eye. So always keeping in mind that there is not always direct causation between two data points. Third core, execution. So execution, for me, this is really important because I've seen many sides of how this is solved. Resources. You need to make sure that you have people both who understands it, but you also need to have enough people to support your strategy and your vision. If your expectation is to have a people analytics team up and running, doing global predictive analytics in the next 6 months, you can't expect to do that probably with one person. You need a little bit more resources. You need the technology. You need like the architecture and infrastructure behind it. And it also needs to be in the company DNA. And I would say this is a lot different for a company that's been doing things a certain way. Maybe older companies have been doing things a certain way for a long time and are right now in the middle of a digital transformation versus maybe a startup which was built during the digital age and never had these old processes. So something to really keep in mind, then the more buy-in you have from the top management, the easier this is going to be, because if they can push it, then data is going to be part of your daily life and everyone's daily life within your HR organization. And also, of course, as I said, supporting technology. There's no one right answer for people to use this tool or this tool. There are many great tools out there, and really think about what's going to support what you need, but also make sure that you do a proper investment into this. It will pay off in the long run. Now, involvement, as I said, make sure that you're part of discussions, part of the decision making. Be part of, try to focus your energy to talking to the CHRO of your organization or your manager, because being involved will open up so many doors. And same thing there, be part of stakeholder meetings. Even if you don't have a particular agenda to start with, it's going to be super important to be there, because then you're part of the discussions and you can start developing tools, and basically it's going to generate its own demand for people analytics in the long run. Communication is also key. So whatever you build, don't just build it and then throw it to the side. And then, two people accessed it once and you spent 4 weeks building it. Keep that communication going. Why does this dashboard or this visualization or this model make sense for the organization to use? What's the value? And do that through marketing. Send a communication, do a presentation every now and then of how or what kind of value that the organization can see from what you're delivering. And also iterate, because you will be working on products, and as I've experienced many times, is that time is something that's going to be a big factor in this, because some things you might think, okay, this is super easy. Turns out it might take a lot of time to develop something. Or you need to iterate on it multiple times, because as you start building, the person who asked for your product didn't really know what they were looking for. They knew they had some questions, but then they see the data, and then there's another 50 questions that you need to answer, and you need to prioritize. So the time investment is really important. Also testing, making sure that what you deliver is actually accurate. And this is even more important if you decide to split the same KPIs into multiple dashboards. Because if you have different numbers in different dashboards, then again, the trustworthiness of your products is going to fall, and people are going to be really confused why this person sees one number and someone else sees something else. And it's also about proving and disproving different theories. We have a lot of focus on diversity and inclusion in our organization, for example, and there are some ideas or hypotheses that this or this is more important around diversity and inclusion. Turns out actually it's the opposite. So using that data to think about it, maybe you need to take a different angle to really push your message through. And this is where you need to partner with this organization, with your stakeholders, to really be able to support them in their decisions. Now, rounding off the execution side, we have consulting versus self-service. So for me, consulting is about analyzing and explaining data to and the dashboards to end users and developing products to meet their needs. It's basically we're doing most of the job and we're telling them what the data tells us. And we give them insights. In some cases, that's a great thing. Self-service is basically allowing the users to learn and educate themselves on the dashboards and do training and guidance for how to use the dashboards. In the long term, this might be the better thing. You might also have products that are too advanced for people to do self-service. Again, we're working in HR, and a lot of HR people, maybe this is my own bias, but a lot of HR people are not that used to data. And there is might be an issue with data literacy where they're not using Excel every day, or they're not using these dashboards. That's a journey that we're on and we want to change. But in some cases, it might be better to do consulting. So I would say when there is basic or advanced analytics, there is a place and approach for each of these products depending on the complexity. And also that's where you add value. And that's where you have partners within the business. So not like business partners, but sort of analytics partners who can tell them and help them make the right decisions by looking at the data. Now, rounding off, I have the future. So the future for me is really about moving beyond borders. So we talk a lot about HR and people data. But for me, the next step is really to start considering what is not HR data. How do we combine our HR data with like sales? For example, we look at the performance review of people. How does that correlate with how our sales are going for a specific organization? Maybe we have someone who's really a high performer because it seems like they're bringing in tons of data. But what if, in fact, they're actually having a lot of expenses as well because they travel a lot? Maybe not now during COVID, but just imagine that they're, out there with the customers. They're doing things that cost a lot of money, so their profit margin is not actually that high. But since this data sits in multiple different places, it might be hard to understand. So being able to combine all of this information with business data, it's going to be even more of a strong point for people analytics to continue to grow. And there's going to be synergies where they utilize data from HR. So basically removing these borders that we have between functions. Again, keeping in mind GDPR and other potential blockers for this. Possibilities. I mean, people analytics is still a very young area. I mean, I'd say generally we're 10 years behind where marketing analytics is, and look at what they're doing. There is a huge opportunity for creativity and also being able to do this high impact influence on the organization. But again, it requires a lot of these key points that I mentioned before. Challenges. I know we talked about this. What is the challenge? Some of the key challenges I'm seeing is really the utilization, because again, we spend time building something and then we realize that, oh, wait, no one's using this. We spent a month developing this and it was super important for a week and then people forgot about it. So utilization, also increasing the data literacy through education and training, making data part of their daily lives is really important. And of course, the volume. The earlier you are in this stage of the journey and the younger your company is, the less data you will have. So volumes is also a challenge for us, whereas other analytics functions may have billions of rows of data. We're stuck with couple of thousand or less, depending on the size of your company. I mean, again, it can generate a lot of volume over time, but it takes time to get there. And finally, experiment. I mean, every time I go to a conference, I talk to people, they talk about these really advanced things, but then in practice, I ask how many people have actually implemented these things. And a lot of people are still stuck in building dashboards and reporting, and that's not a bad thing. It's just that the maturity of this domain, it's still in its early stages, which also leaves a lot of opportunity for theoretical solutions or new exciting products. Data science is taking more and more space in this, but it's also about taking chances. So for me, people analytics is really the future for HR and something that's going to be a bigger part of the HR organizations moving forward. With that, I think I'm out of time. So I'm going to say thank you everyone for listening, and I hope this was useful.
Thank you very much, Henrik. Well, we can see from the chat that this is a highly appreciated topic, and I have a really hard time to keep track of all the questions in the chat window. So I guess we have time for some questions. And I honestly lost track of the questions in the chat because it just went wild. Does anyone have a question that we want to ask Henrik?
I have one.
Okay.
So, shoot. Thanks, Henrik. It was quite a presentation. Hopefully you have time to look at chat board because it's full of questions and comments. So my question is, what about 2025? Would it be so that we have one company or group level analytics team? So no specific people analytics team anymore. How you see it? What's your feeling?
Potentially, yes. I think right now we're ending up within the HR function. I've seen actually analytics being part of IT as well in some cases, because that's where it might naturally sit with a data team. I think that will change over time. I think much like many other business intelligence functions, it will be potentially centralized. But the key thing here, and I think one of the key differences still, is that we're dealing with people. and moving into a data organization that don't understand HR processes and more internal data and how to deal with people, I'm not so sure it's going to be so easy to do in the next 5 years. Maybe over time, we're also already seeing, for example, in our team, we're absorbing CSR and sustainability within our people analytics, which is not necessarily people data, but again, showing the value of people analytics. So I think it's going to broaden, but maybe not completely convert, in my opinion.
Okay, need to wait a couple of years.
Yes, exactly. But even then, just to add to that, and I saw the question in the chat as well, why HR should have its own analytics department. And I think it's really key to understand the HR processes, because we're talking about a lot of internal data. Much like marketing might have their own analytics, it's very specific data within HR, and it's also very sensitive. And what I mentioned before, it's also very volume is very different from maybe a normal BI team who deals with a lot higher volumes of data.